Okay, let's dive in. What if everything you thought was solid was real? Isn't quite.
You mean like the world around us,
Yeah,
even our own minds?
exactly. What if consciousness isn't just, a product of your brain?
And what if things like God or free will or even death are totally different from the usual story?
That's precisely the sort of territory we're stepping into today. We've been looking at some really deep material.
Yeah, from three pretty incredible minds, actually. Chris Langan developed the CTMU,
Right, the microprocessor inventor, Federico Faggin.
and Bernardo Kastrup, the philosopher, formerly at CERN.
And they come at this from such different angles, don't they? Logic, engineering, physics, philosophy.
Completely different starting points, yet somehow they arrive at conclusions that, well, they can really shake things up for you.
So our mission here is to kind of unpack their core arguments.
Yeah, pull out the really surprising bits, the nuggets, and help you get a handle on these, let's face it, potentially reality-bending ideas.
We'll be looking at reality itself, consciousness, God, free will.
And yeah, the big one, what happens after we die, all through their unique lenses. So buckle up.
Okay, first up, the nature of reality. The usual view is, well, it's just stuff out there, right? Independent of us.
Right, the common sense view. But all three sources basically say, hold on, not so fast.
They're suggesting it's not just inert stuff.
Exactly. There's a mental aspect,
Yeah.
an internal quality that's absolutely crucial. It's not just external.
Okay, so take Langan's CTMU, the cognitive theoretic model of the universe. That's a mouthful.
It is. But his core idea is pretty radical. He argues the universe isn't like a computer. It is a self-aware computational system.
A self-aware system. So reality itself has an identity.
That's it. And that identity have properties. He talks about a display, the static states we see, like a freeze frame,
Okay.
and a processing aspect,
Right.
the dynamics, what makes things change and evolve.
And where does God fit into that system?
Well, for Langan, God isn't some separate being outside the system. God is the overarching identity that includes both that static display and the dynamic processing. It's inherent to the structure.
Wow. So you're deducing God's properties from logic, from the structure itself?
That's the claim in the CTMU, yes.
Yeah.
It's quite a leap from typical thinking.
Okay, how does that compare to Bernardo Kastrup? He comes from a different place.
He does analytic idealism, but it's just as disruptive, maybe even more so. His starting point is everything is fundamentally mental.
Everything, like this table, the microphone, it's mental.
Well, he'd say the physicality you perceive is like a representation on a dashboard.
Ah, the airplane dashboard analogy. I like that one.
Yeah, the dials show you airspeed, altitude information about the outside reality, but the dials aren't the sky itself,
So our senses show us colors, shapes, textures.
which are like the dashboard display for a deeper underlying mental reality. Matter, he says, is just what mental processes look like when observed from an outside perspective.
Like seeing brain activity on an fMRI when someone is thinking.
Exactly that kind of idea, but scaled up to the entire universe. The physical world isn't the base layer, it's the appearance of mind.
Okay, mind blown already. And then there's Faggin bringing the quantum angle.
Right? Faggin argues classical physics, the billiard ball view of atoms, miss the deeper reality, the quantum field.
So particles aren't little solid things.
Not really. They're more like ripples or temporary states of that field. Think of an ocean. A wave isn't separate from the ocean. It is the ocean doing something locally.
So reality is interconnected, holistic. You can't just isolate the parts.
That's the key. Everything arises from and is connected through this underlying field. It's not built from separate bricks.
And observation. It's not passive in this view, is it?
Not at all. Faggin, and quantum physics generally, suggests the act of observing, of becoming aware, is somehow part of what makes reality. Well, real. It collapses potential into actuality.
So the observer isn't separate. They're part of the system they're observing.
Precisely. Which ties back to that idea of reality having an internal or mental aspect.
Okay, so we've gone from external stuff to reality as a self-aware system, or fundamentally mental, or an interconnected quantum field where we participate. That's a huge shift.
It absolutely is. And it leads directly to the next big theme, consciousness.
Right, because in all these models, consciousness isn't just a fluke of evolution, something the brain spits out.
No, it's fundamental. It's foundational in some way.
Langan talks about generic consciousness. What's that? Does he mean like rocks are conscious?
Well, sort of, but not like you or me. He talks about identity operators at the quantum level, processing information. He posits these have a very, very basic form of awareness. generic consciousness.
So even a table has some rudimentary level.
According to the CTMU, yes. The difference isn't conscious, but the complexity of that consciousness. Humans are just vastly more complex information processors.
Okay, that's a lot to take in. Faggin also puts consciousness front and center, right?
Absolutely. He's very clear. Consciousness is fundamental. The brain doesn't produce it.
It doesn't. Then what does the brain do?
He sees it more like a sophisticated receiver, or maybe a filter. It translates or tunes into a deeper awareness that already exists, probably in that quantum field he talks about.
A translator, not a generator. Okay.
Yeah. And he makes this interesting distinction between classical information data, bits, stuff you can copy.
Like computer code.
Exactly. And quantum information, which he links to subjective experience, to qualia, the feeling of red, the sound of a note. That stuff is private, internal. You can't copy a feeling.
And that's where meaning comes from that inner conscious experience.
That's his argument. Meaning isn't in the data itself, it's generated by consciousness experiencing it.
Which explains why AI, even sophisticated AI,
can manipulate symbols brilliantly, follow rules, even seem creative, but it doesn't know or feel the meaning. It simulates structure but lacks the inner experience.
And self-awareness for Faggin.
It's like the quantum field, becoming aware of itself, looking back at itself through specific points, creating individuality, a unique perspective.
That sounds remarkably similar to Kastrup's idea.
It really does resonate with Kastrup's universal consciousness. He posits there's fundamentally only one mind, one conscious field.
And then we are, what, parts of it?
He uses the term dissociations, like alters in someone with dissociative identity disorder.
Okay, explain that dissociation idea a bit more.
Imagine the one universal mind can experience reality through multiple, seemingly separate centers of awareness that's us. The boundaries between you, me, the outside world. They're structurally real in terms of how consciousness organizes itself, but they aren't fundamental separations. It's all folds within the one mind.
So it's like a useful illusion, the separateness.
A useful appearance, yeah.
Yeah.
Not an absolute truth about the underlying reality.
So, okay, whether it's generic quantum awareness or a fundamental field filtered by the brain or us being alters of one universal mind, the common thread is consciousness isn't secondary. It's primary.
It's the bedrock. And if consciousness is the bedrock, then concepts like God and spirituality start to look very different too.
Langan, coming from his CTMU, is pretty direct about God, isn't he?
Extremely direct. He argues that God's existence and properties like omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence, and sentience aren't just matters of faith. He believes they are logically derivable from the very structure of reality defined by the CTMU.
So the system requires something like God to function.
Essentially, yes. A comprehensive sentient identity is needed for reality to be self-configuring and coherent, according to his model. And he sees this God as personal.
Personal, meaning you can relate to it.
Yes, because he says we are images of God, mappings of that ultimate identity into human form. So a relationship is possible. His view is called panentheistic. God is in everything, but also more than everything.
And he doesn't stop there. The sources mention angels, demons.
Right. Langan includes them as real entities within this framework. He sees Satan as the necessary antithesis, the boundary condition opposite to God's perfect coherence.
And he links demonic influence to human structures.
Yeah, this was striking. He argues that these negative forces gain coherence and power through human systems corporations, governments, when those systems embody things like deception, greed, or control.
That makes the idea of evil feel less abstract, more systemic. How does Kastrup handle God?
Well, as an analytic idealist, the universal consciousness is the ultimate reality. So by definition, it's omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent because it's all there is. Everything else is just patterns or excitations within it.
But does he see it as a personal God, like Langan?
Less so. He acknowledges that it has those omni-properties, but maybe not personal intention or deliberation like a cosmic personality, just as the ground of being. His view is also somewhat panentheistic reality extends beyond what we perceive.
So the sacred isn't somewhere else?
No, it's right here. It's within us. It's the world around us because it's all part of the one mind. We're swimming in it, so to speak.
Okay, two different paths leading to something godlike being fundamental, even if the nature personal versus impersonal field differs.
Exactly. Which brings us to maybe the most personal questions. Free will, time, and death.
Free will. Always a tricky one. Langan says yes.
Yes, definitely. He argues it exists because reality in the CTMU isn't predetermined. It's generative. Our observations, our choices, participate in creating what happens next.
And he connects this to computational irreducibility. What does that mean again?
It means you can't predict the future by taking a shortcut. The only way to know what the system will do is to actually run the system, let it play out step by step.
So no cheating?
No cheating.
Huh?
Because of this, Langan argues, even God within the CTMU can't know your specific choices in advance. Your act of choosing is the computation.
Ah, so my choice isn't predetermined because the universe literally has to wait for me to make it.
That's the idea. Your choice is part of the irreducible unfolding. Faggin connects free will to quantum mechanics too, right?
Yes, he links it to the collapse of the wave function. The quantum world is all possibilities.
Until an observation, or conscious act, seems to make one possibility actual. Faggin suggests that selection process, driven by conscious awareness, is free will.
Our awareness locks in reality from potential.
That's the interpretation. And he also invokes computational irreducibility. You can't know the outcome of a quantum choice beforehand.
Okay, Kastrup's take on free will feels a bit different, though. More determined.
It's nuanced. He'd say, yes, you make choices, you have agency. But the choice you make is determined by who you are in that moment, your patterns, your history, how the universal mind is manifesting as you.
So not libertarian free will, not the idea I could have genuinely done otherwise in that exact same situation.
Probably not in that specific sense. Your choice flows necessarily from your state of being. But, he stresses, this doesn't make the choice meaningless.
How so?
Because your choices reveal something. They are how consciousness explores its possibilities through you. And, like the others, he emphasizes computational irreducibility. The universe discovers itself through these choices, meaning emerges from that discovery.
It's a wild thought. Our choices, even if flowing from who we are the universe's R&D department.
Huh, that's one way to put it. And speaking of fundamental structures, time and space, are they the absolute grid we think they are?
Both Kastrup and Faggin suggest maybe not.
Kastrup sees them more like internal organizing principles for consciousness, like a filing system or how you navigate data, not fundamental dimensions of existence itself. Reality might be timeless, a crystal of eternity.
And Faggin.
He agrees time and space as we know them can't be the bottom layer. He talks about a deeper reality, maybe a feeling and quantum fields, where consciousness truly resides, outside of space-time.
So time and space could be features of our experience, how consciousness parses reality, rather than the container reality sits in.
Exactly, which leads inevitably to the question of death. If consciousness isn't just the brain and time isn't absolute.
Then maybe death isn't annihilation. What do they say? Langan seems pretty confident about survival.
Very confident. In his CTMU model, you persist. Where you go depends on your relationship with God, essentially your alignment with the coherent structure of reality. Separation leads to a kind of self-created negative state. Connection leads to being integrated back towards God.
Faggin's analogy is powerful here, the drone operator.
Yes. Consciousness is the operator. The body is the drone. Death is just losing the signal, the connection breaking down.
But the operator consciousness continues.
Continues, because it was never in the drone, the body, to begin with. It was using it, experiencing through it from its deeper quantum reality.
And things like near-death experiences, where people report awareness while clinically dead.
He sees those as potential evidence supporting this. Awareness persisting without brain function suggests consciousness isn't tied solely to the brain. The physical world, for Faggin, is like wearing heavy filters. Death might be taking those filters off.
Revealing a much larger reality.
Perhaps. And Kastrup's view fits right in. If consciousness is fundamental and time isn't, then birth and death are just phase transitions in appearance. Consciousness itself doesn't begin or end. It just changes form or expression.
So across the board, despite the different models, there's this strong suggestion that death isn't the end of awareness, but a transition. A change in state, maybe even a return to a broader reality.
It's a profound reframing, isn't it? Moving away from matter first, consciousness later.
To a view where consciousness or mind or a self-aware structure is primary, and the physical world is its expression or appearance.
And look at the common threads that emerge. Deep interconnectedness, the observer being part of the observed, reality being computationally irreducible, meaning the future isn't just sitting there.
And meaning and knowing arising from within consciousness itself, not just from processing external data.
So, okay, let's bring this home. What does this mean for you listening right now? If reality is fundamentally mental or conscious, if you're a unique viewpoint within that, if death isn't the final curtain,
How does that change things? It suggests maybe we're not as separate as we feel. Maybe cooperation makes more sense than competition on a fundamental level.
It certainly points that way. And it leaves us with a pretty big final thought to chew on.
Which is?
If consciousness isn't just passively watching, but actively participates in turning potential into reality, as these thinkers suggest,
And if you, through your awareness, your choices, are part of that process.
what kind of responsibility does that place on you, on your attention, on your choices, not just for your own little life, but maybe for the texture of the reality we all experience together?